I want to talk to you tonight about a topic that is of great importance for apologetics when it comes to the question of the truth of the Christian faith, because at its foundation, Christianity is a religion that is based on a factual claim that a miracle has occurred. There are multiple miracles recorded in the Old and New Testaments, but there is one that is the absolute hinge of our faith, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if you go online and you try to find what internet atheists are saying about belief in miracles, you'll hear the name of David Hume. If you go to a philosophy classroom and you take a philosophy of religion class, or maybe just an intro to philosophy class where miracles are mentioned, you'll hear the name of David Hume, and you probably won't hear any other names, because these subjects are typically presented as though Hume both inaugurated and ended the discussion of an appeal to factual reports of miracles as a ground for religious belief. I have a special message about that I want to drive home tonight. We'll see if we can't pull that up at some point. But I always like to start these talks with some kind of an epigraph. I often do it from Scripture, but this time I thought, no, I'm going to pull something from a French scientist of the 19th century, François Arago. Arago said, "Doubt is a proof of modesty. It has seldom harmed the progress of the sciences. I could not say as much for incredulity. Apart from pure mathematics, whoever pronounces the word impossible is wanting in prudence." By the time we're done tonight, I hope you understand why I chose that as an epigraph for tonight's talk. Let's sharpen up the question at issue. Here it is. Is it reasonable for us, in at least some particular cases, to believe on the basis of the evidence we actually have that a miracle has occurred? To that question, Hume's answer is decisive and crisp. He says no. It is never reasonable for us to believe in any particular case on the basis of the evidence we actually have, or indeed on the basis of any evidence we could have that a miracle has occurred. So let's introduce the Prince of Skeptics, David Hume, a notable Scottish philosopher. Indeed, many contemporary philosophers would say this is the most important philosopher of the modern period. Some would say the most important philosopher of all time. He's the author of a tremendously influential argument against the credibility of reported miracles. He published this in 1748. It is now the one thing you will read if you read anything about miracles in a philosophy class on a secular college campus. I know this because I attended a Jesuit school, and it was the only thing they gave me to read. I asked around. I had gone into philosophy because I wanted to know how to defend my faith, so I asked my professors, some of whom were ostensibly Catholic, also ostensibly Christian. Those don't always come together. It was odd. But said to them, okay, has anybody else written about this? Well, they weren't really sure. And why would I ask anyway? Hume was so transparently, obviously right. And that was the view from the late 20th century. But there's been a fascinating change that Hume's argument has undergone, a change in its fortunes. Here's a quotation about Hume's argument regarding miracles. Quote, "Hume's argument is largely derivative, almost wholly without merit where it is original, and worst of all, reveals the impoverishment of his treatment of inductive reasoning." Wow. Which apologist said that? None. This is the judgment of John Ehrman, who is an agnostic philosopher of science recently retired from the University of Pittsburgh. What is an agnostic philosopher of science doing writing about Hume's critique of miracles? Why would he care, and why would he say things like this about it? Hang with us tonight, and you'll get a taste of that. I'd like to make 3 key points about reported miracles. To me, these seem obvious, but obviously to some people they are not. So here are the 3 points that I would like to make. First, The existence of a stable order of nature, a way things normally happen, does not count as evidence against the existence of miracles, at least if they are supposed to function as signs in a religious context. That's my first claim. I will have to argue for that claim. I can't get away simply with asserting it. I need to provide you with reasons for believing it. Here is my second claim, which, if possible, seems to me even more transparent. It ought to be possible to change one's mind about miracles. But again, this is not as obvious to some people as it seems to me. My third claim, and this will be controversial as well, though I don't really see why it should be, is that the proper way to arrive at a reasonable belief is to examine the evidence in detail. We don't always have the luxury to do that. Life is short. Sometimes the beliefs aren't important. But when they are important and we do have the time and the ability to do it, that's what we should do. The more so if incredibly important things hang on the issue. So let's go to point one. I claim the existence of a stable order of nature does not count as evidence against the existence of miracles, at least if they're supposed to function as signs in a religious context. That claim is flatly contradicted by Hume. Here's Hume on the order of nature. A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and as a firm and unalterable experience has established these laws, the proof against a miracle from the very nature of the fact is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. Now let's put on our translation software here and try to see what does this mean in non-philosopher speak. You've got an argument that can't be beat. Somebody else brings other arguments against it. What's going to happen? The argument that can't be beat is going to win. It's just the way it is. So what Hume is saying is there is an argument from the very nature of the fact when you call something a miracle that is as entire as any experiential argument you could possibly have. Well, then I guess we're done, right? But Hume's contemporaries weren't so impressed by what he had to say. Here is William Adams, for a short while Samuel Johnson's Latin tutor, writing in response to Hume's essay. See if you can see past the antiquity of the language to the point beneath. An experienced uniformity in the course of nature hath been always thought necessary to the belief and use of miracles. These are indeed relative ideas. There must be an ordinary, regular course of nature before there can be anything extraordinary. A river must flow before its stream can be interrupted. What is Adams telling us? He's saying, look, you can't have an interruption of the course of nature unless there's a course of nature to be interrupted. If somewhere around the globe, scattered about, there are some people who can turn water into wine, say 1 person out of every 10,000, probably congregating mostly on college campuses because people want to go where they'll be popular. What would we say of the report that Jesus of Nazareth had turned water into wine? Oh, bet you he was one of them, right? That would be obvious. Why would we say, I think God was reaching into space and time and doing something there, if this were just something that a few people can do, if it were a natural phenomenon? And thinking of it that way, thinking of the course of nature and its interruption, leads us, I think, to a better definition of a miracle. And I'm taking this definition not from my fellow Christian apologists, but from the atheist philosopher J.L. Mackie. I'll paraphrase here, but this is Mackie's approach. Laws of nature tell us how nature behaves when it is left to itself, but they do not tell us whether or how often it is left to itself. A miracle is not a violation of the laws of nature, as if it could take place only if the laws were false. It's a violation of what we call the causal closure of the physical world, the idea that all events are the inevitable result of prior physical events, so that everything that happens is happening the way it is because of prior physical events. You can do a non-deterministic little wiggle on that if you like your quantum theory. But the basic idea is nothing outside of natural causes causes anything to happen in nature. A miracle would be a violation of the causal closure of nature. Now, there's a general principle of evidence, and here I tread delicately because this is the place where we get the closest to that mathy stuff. So in a moment, there's going to be one equation, and as far as I know, it's the only equation in the entire thing, and you can hum the equation. For those of you who are severely allergic to mathematics, this is a time to close your eyes and hum the equation. It's coming, it's not here yet. Here's the principle in non-equation form. If on the supposition that M, which I've cleverly chosen to stand for a miracle, were true, it would be inevitable also that O be true. Then O cannot be evidence against M. So whatever it is that you're observing, O, if a miracle kind of requires it, then it's not evidence against a miracle. All right. Close eyes for those of you who are allergic. Here's the technical version. I'll give you my slides later if you want them. There are a few people interested in arcane things who keep those eyes closed, every head bowed, every eye closed. All right. Right. I was raised Baptist. I know the drill. Okay. It's gone. All right, you're good. We took those prayer requests. We're good. All right. Now, here's the thing. In religious contexts, miracles are supposed to function as signs. What does Nicodemus say when he comes to Jesus by night in John 3? Rabbi, we know you are a teacher sent from God. Why? How do we know? No one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. They show you God's endorsement. So, in a religious context, this is what miracles are supposed to be. Well, how do we know something's a miracle? Because it's not the kind of thing that happens when nature is left to itself. Miracles that function as signs would be impossible unless they took place against the backdrop of a stable natural order. That's what lets us see them as signs. Remember, if water into wine is something a few people can do, like mastering a good card trick, then when you hear Jesus turn water into wine, that's how you classify it. Natural event, nothing to see here. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Move along. Therefore, the existence of a stable order of nature cannot be used as an argument against miracles in religious contexts. So I'm a philosopher. We like to do stuff like that. We like to lay out our premises and then put the word therefore in and then number another line and call that the conclusion. And some of you aren't wired that way. So I'm going to try to do this in a different way. I'm going to try to do this graphically. Here's a sign. This is a sign that has a message on it that I very much want you to get. The trouble is, I have used the same color for the font that I've used for the background. And that kind of makes it hard to see this as a sign. But I really, really want you to get the message. And you're saying, I'm not feeling it. The burning in my bosom isn't doing it for me. Okay, so what if we make it a more helpful sign? How about this? Now you're tracking with me. Now you're saying, oh, there's a background and then there's a message up against it. That's what a miracle is like. Miracles stand out from the background of the way nature goes. The virgin birth. Some people on the internet seem to think they can really persuade Christians out of the virgin birth if they say, P.S. modern science. Right. Just how ignorant was a first century Jew? Didn't know where babies come from? What is Joseph minded to do when he discovers Mary's pregnant? Divorce her privately, because he's a good man. He doesn't want to cause more scandal than he has to. He knows where babies come from. The resurrection of Jesus. Yeah, well, dead people stay dead. Yeah, that's the point, right? That's why this is a miracle. It doesn't happen in the course of nature when nature is left to itself. Ergo, if it happened, nature wasn't left to itself. That's kind of the whole deal. And we're not going to be talked out of it by being told there's something a little odd about it. Yeah, we know. All right. Point number 2. It ought to be possible to change one's mind about miracles. I got into philosophy partly because I wanted to pursue an answer to this question all the way down to the ground. When should I change my mind? And there's another question very closely related to that you can ask to somebody else, especially if he's giving you Hume's argument against miracles. If you are wrong, how will you find out? Doesn't it seem like there should be some answer to that question? If you are wrong, how will you find out? Again, I'm not making this up as an apologist because I think it would be convenient to me if people accepted this point. This is something that's accepted by people who have no interest in organized religious belief at all. I call to witness William James in his book, The Will to Believe, published about 100 years ago. A rule of thinking, he writes, which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth if those kinds of truth were really there, would be an irrational rule. David Hume, I'd like you to meet William James. Because Hume is presenting us with such a rule. Oh, you say, wait, you haven't proved that. You're just claiming that. Maybe you're slandering David Hume. Let's have a look at what Hume has to say about not changing one's mind. He describes a situation in which the Cardinal de Retz reports that there was a talk about a miracle that had happened. And he says, he therefore concluded like a just reasoner that such an evidence carried falsehood upon the very face of it, and that a miracle supported by any human testimony was more properly a subject of derision than of argument. That's from Of Miracles, Part 2, paragraph 26. He's going to have a hard time changing his mind with that attitude, right? But maybe I just trimmed that one out of context. Maybe I just caught Hume on a bad day. Let's see what else he says. But should this miracle, he's been discussing a hypothetical case, be ascribed to any new system of religion, men in all ages have been so much imposed on by ridiculous stories of that kind that this very circumstance, that it is ascribed to a new religion, would be a full proof of a cheat and sufficient with all men of sense, not only to make them reject the fact, but even reject it without farther examination. If he is wrong, how is he going to find out? Well, let's do another one, because maybe I just cherry-picked 2 passages out of Hume. You never know. These apologists, they're so slippery. Maybe they're just picking the bad parts. Here's another one. As the violations of truth are more common in the testimony concerning religious miracles than in that concerning any other matter of fact, this must diminish very much the authority of the former testimony and make us form a general resolution never to lend any attention to it, with whatever specious pretense it may be covered. Bad news, Galileo, he will not look through your telescope. This is a guy who won't change his mind. It's not about how good the evidence is. It's about an unwillingness to let evidence make contact with the issue. So let's do a test case of this kind of reasoning. And just to make it interesting, let's go outside of apologetics. Let's go outside the philosophy of religion. Let's go to the history of science. Let's talk about meteorites. Do meteorites really fall from the sky? Well, now, That's funny because there are lots of stories in lots of cultures about stones that fall from heaven. And in fact, ignorant peasants would often venerate these stones as some kind of heavenly sign. The scientists who heard about this were incredulous. Rocks falling from the sky, really now? Come on. We all know about gravity, don't we? Have you ever heard of a guy named Isaac Newton? And since the testimony was generally the testimony of peasants, the meteorites never did seem to fall in the middle of a scientific lecture hall. They tended to fall out in fields, of which there were many more than there were of scientific lecture halls, so that kind of makes sense. The scientists, including some very great scientists, were on the whole so incredulous that they simply refused to believe the testimony of the peasants. Let me give you a couple of instances. Antoine Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry, dismissed written affidavits that the stones these peasants had found were still warm when they were discovered, and he reportedly changed one of the affidavits, arguing that the rocks must have been artificially warmed. He changed someone else's affidavit. Pro tip, do not do this. Say the guy's wrong. Say that you don't believe him. Say he's an ignorant slob and he's good for nothing but raking potatoes. But do not change his written affidavit. Poor scientist. Looks like an ass now, right? But incredulity now, that's a hard thing. Do you remember what Arago said about incredulity? Outside of pure mathematics, whoever utters the word impossible is wanting in prudence. Because how will you change your mind once you've said something's impossible? When it's impossible to have good reasons for something, well, what impact do reasons have on your worldview? Pierre-Simon Laplace interrupted a presentation at the French Academy of Sciences about an alleged fall of meteorites, shouting, "We already know enough such fables!" Wow. Imagine what he would have said about the virgin birth. Same thing. Do you see what happens when you don't allow yourself to change your mind? This is a bad thing. This is trapping yourself in a mental trapdoor, and then you can't get back out. Ernst Cladini, a historian, writes in 1819 that disbelief and scorn was so common, many museums had discarded their collections of meteorites for fear of being ridiculed by the scientific establishment. Point number 3. The proper way to arrive at a reasonable belief is to examine the evidence in detail. And we take our time with that in proportion as the matter is important. If I'm trying to buy a new coffee maker because our old coffee maker is dying, I am not going to do months of research on coffee makers. It doesn't matter all that much. They're not too expensive. I can always buy another one if this one's a dud. If I'm trying to decide where to send my child for college, I'm going to do some research. That's a big investment. It has life-changing consequences. I want to know everything I can know about this. If I want to know whether I have an immortal soul, and if so, what's going to happen to it, what is more important than my earnestly investigating this? I need to do my diligence, and the way to do that is to examine the evidence in detail. Now, it seems that Hume is actually on our side. Here's how a passage from him runs. He says, "When anyone tells me he saw a dead man restored to life," hey, my head's up, right? Hume's going to talk about this one now, right? Yeah. "I immediately consider with myself whether it be more probable that this person should either deceive or be deceived," the guy who's telling it to you, "or that the fact which he relates should really have happened. I weigh the one miracle against the other, and according to the superiority which I discover, I pronounce my decision and always reject the greater miracle." You see what he's doing here. The greater miracle is the more improbable thing, right? "If the falsehood of his testimony would be more miraculous than the event which he relates, then, and not till then, can he pretend to command my belief or opinion." If you presented Hume's challenge to pastors, names chosen at random out of a hat, what would they say? Shuffle their feet a little bit? Reject this brazen appeal to human reason? You know what? I like old apologists because some of them approach this exactly the way I think it should be approached. They said, game on. Exactly. No statement, this is a Christian responding to Hume, no statement could be more reasonable. Let us proceed then to the comparison. The Christian has to produce testimony to miracle, whose falsehood would be a mightier wonder than the miracle attested, and Hume has to weigh miracle against miracle. What then was the next step to be taken in Hume's argument? What did his own statement require him to do? Clearly, to take up the miracles, which Christians allege to be true, to set their evidence fully and distinctly forth, and to point out that, however plausible that evidence might be, its fallaciousness would be no miracle compared with the miracle affirmed. That's what Hume says it's supposed to be. This is Peter Bain saying, let's go. Let's do it. And then he goes on. But every reader of Hume's essay knows that he has done nothing of the sort. The nature of the evidence required for the Christian miracles, once fairly stated, these miracles are quietly put by him out of court. The trial proceeds by proxy. Hume never does consider the resurrection of Jesus. He doesn't want to get his hands dirty with that. Nathaniel Lardner, a contemporary of Hume, had written 17 volumes of historical work on the credibility of the gospel history. Hume wasn't going to touch that. He didn't want to engage with the evidence. He wanted a silver bullet. He wanted to stand above the fray, hurl down methodological thunderbolts, and just wipe out the enemy by doing that. The trial, Bain says, proceeds by proxy. Hume does not ask what proof is offered that the Christian miracles took place. He calls to the bar certain miracles with which Christianity has nothing to do, enters upon their evidence, condemns them as falsities, and then calmly informs the court that the Christian miracles are disproven. How would you like it if you were brought into court and they were charging you with something, you were getting ready to present your case, and they brought somebody else in, and they said, well, this guy's a total scoundrel, and then they condemned you for it? That's not right. That's a bad way to proceed. So what does Hume actually discuss? Well, 2 miraculous cures attributed to the future Emperor Vespasian. He's in Alexandria. He's announced his pretensions to the imperial throne. He's just a general at this time. He's not nobly born, so he needs a little bit of cachet. So they find a couple of beggars to come, and one of them says, oh, I'm blind. And the other one says, oh, I'm lame. But they told us in the temple of Serapis, the local deity, that if the emperor would touch us, we'd be healed. Vespasian doesn't even know what to make of it. He says, all right, what's up here? So some of his physicians examine that and say, well, the blind guy's not totally blind, and the lame guy's not really all that lame. And if you do it and nothing works, we'll blame them. And if you do it and it works, then all good. So he touches them. Oh, I can see! Yeah, everybody stood to gain from this little charade. Nobody faced any opposition. There's an alleged cure in Saragossa, deep in Spain, of a man's amputated leg by the application of holy oil, reported by Cardinal de Retz. Not the miracle. De Retz just says, well, they say that his leg was amputated and restored. I saw him with 2. That's all we got. And then some healings alleged to have taken place at the tomb of the Abbé Paris in the early 1700s when the Jansenists and the Jesuits were at each other's throats. And the Abbé Paris was a Jansenist figure, so the Jansenists whipped up a lot of fervor around that. Okay, but how are we supposed to plow into all these miracle claims? Here's an objection. Surely, it requires more evidence to establish a miraculous claim than it does to establish an ordinary one. Surely that is reasonable. I mean, even if you're going to say that you think you can meet that burden, that's a plausible form. Here's a not so plausible form. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. How many of you have heard that one? It's a line from Chariots of Fire. That sounds clever. What does it mean? Seriously, what exactly does this slogan mean? I have thought about this for a long time, and with the help of some anonymous genius online whose work I am adapting here, I think I've figured out what most people mean when they say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And since this is a claim that was put in the mouth of the science popularizer Carl Sagan when he was presenter for the initial Cosmos show. Anybody remember Carl Sagan? Billions and billions, right? That guy. He used to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So I'm going to christen this the Argumentum Sagani in his honor. And I think it goes like this: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The claim that a miracle has occurred is extraordinary. Therefore, any evidence supporting it ought to be extraordinary as well. I'm not sure what I mean by extraordinary. But whatever you come up with, it's not going to work. Therefore, no one is justified in believing any miracle claims. I think that's how it goes. And I hope you see what the problem is. We need to be somewhat more explicit about what we're doing and how exactly this is supposed to be underwritten. Let's try a scientific test case. According to one proposed theory in nuclear physics, spontaneous proton decay happens, but extremely rarely. So rarely that so far no instances have ever been observed. Theory might be right, theory might be wrong, but that's the proposal. Spontaneous proton decay happens, but really super, super rarely. So what have we done? Said, well, if it's never even been noticed, we can't think about it. No, scientists have set up sensitive detectors in underground water tanks in an attempt to see whether this actually takes place. And you can say, but detectors fail sometimes. Yes, they do, but they still think it's worth gathering some evidence. The fact that 100% of the protons so far observed have not decayed does not mean it's impossible for us to accept evidence of such decay. We might not be expecting it, but it would be kind of cool if we got it, so let's have a look and see. Now, if scientists proceeded according to Hume's principles, a uniform experience has testified that protons don't decay. So you've got an argument as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. So why would you believe it if the detectors went off and said, whoop, we caught a proton decay? This is why John Earman, the philosophy of science, doesn't like Hume. It's not that he's defending a religious view. He says Hume's argument, if it worked, would prove too much. It would stop us from doing things we know are reasonable to do in the physical sciences. And once you start doing that, the philosophers of science start coming after you. There's a bishop who actually wrote before Hume's essay, Thomas Sherlock, who addresses the question, well, but evidence, come on. He says, I do allow that this case and others of like nature, miraculous claims, the resurrection of Jesus is in question here, require more evidence to give them credit than ordinary cases do. You may therefore require more evidence in these than in other cases. But it is absurd to say that such cases admit no evidence when the things in question are quite manifestly objects of sense. What does he mean by that? How many of you had a good friend, a best friend maybe in high school, somebody that you hung out with a lot, knew the person well, saw the person nearly every day? The rest of you need to get more friends. Okay. Think of a time when you spent like a whole day with this friend of yours. All right? Got something in mind? There's that crazy day when we went skateboarding or at the ball game or when we got caught out on the lake and it started to rain or whatever it is. Some day you spent with this friend. Now, I want to ask you, and I want to ask you most soberly, and I want you to realize human cognition is fallible, and we have a lot of empirical evidence for this, so I want you to be really careful. I want you to be cautious about your answer to my questions. Are you sure that was your friend and not just somebody who looked like your friend? Cognitive psychology? Is anybody worried? No, you're all pretty much, yeah, that was my friend. You're weird. You're a philosopher. I don't know what philosophers are. Okay, but second question, but we got another one. Are you prepared to swear that during that entire day, your friend was alive and not dead? Because if you're good enough to do that, you don't need an MD in order to tell whether somebody's alive or dead, and you don't need some kind of special access to determine whether this is really your friend. I spent the whole day with the person. Yeah, I would know. If it was just somebody who looked like my friend, that might cause a little confusion on a sidewalk for 5 seconds, but that's all. I once had somebody walk up to me on the campus of Western Michigan University and say, "Hey, Randy." No. He walks up to me, "Randy?" There is some poor guy wandering around Southwest Michigan who has the misfortune to look like me. That can happen. But when he got closer, I was like, no, Randy's older than you are. Oh, good, thank you. Pleased to hear that. Wait a minute, you saying I look old? Anyway, it doesn't take extraordinary evidence to say, this man is dead. This man is alive. They're the same man, and I know him. It's unexpected. Oh, yeah, it's unexpected. But it doesn't require some special facilities that only specially trained scientists with special equipment have. That's not the way this works. Okay. But where do we start? Because you know what? There are many religions and thousands upon thousands of miracle claims. I bet you want me to start with your religion, don't you? You know what? It's true. There are thousands upon thousands of miracle claims in many religions. What are we going to do? How could anyone hope to use miracles as evidence for a religion, man? We're going to be stuck going through the umpity-umph version of Hinduism before, we get anywhere. We'll die just trying to plow through them that way. So, I think the objection can be fairly met. There are neutral criteria that make no reference to any particular religious creed, and that can be seen to be reasonable without any appeal to one religion or another, that can help to filter out unpromising candidates for a religious miracle. You're expecting this by this time, right? It's in an old book. John Douglas wrote a book called The Criterion in 1757. And in that book, he argued a miracle claim may reasonably be doubted. He doesn't say it's false, but it may reasonably be doubted when, number one, it is reported only long after the miracle is supposed to have happened. Or, number two, it is reported only at a great distance from the scene. Some of you are taking photographs of my slides, and I love you people. That's awesome, but I'll just give you the slides. It's all good. I'll send them to Bob. You can get them from him, or you can get my email address, get them from me. We're good. So I just don't want you to use up that flash memory on your phone. So you're all good. You're welcome still to take the photographs if you want, but I will give them to you. And I'm very flattered. Thank you. Or, not just time, not just space, but if it would have been allowed when first made to pass without examination. So if somebody makes a miracle claim and it falls in with existing expectations and prejudices, then maybe nobody would be motivated to look at it any more than they were motivated closely to examine the miracle claims regarding the Emperor Vespasian, because it was all good for Vespasian, it was all good for the beggars, it was all good for the priests of Serapis, everybody wins. So let's look at some claims that fail on the first criterion, that is, when the first report comes along after the event. Philostratus wrote a life of Apollonius of Tyana, written over a century after the death of Apollonius. Sorry, first report of these miracles is a great deal later than the time at which they're recorded. All the people living at that time would be dead. You think, wow, so McGrew, you're getting this out of a book published in 1757. That's pretty quaint, but nobody cares anymore, right? Yeah. So Bart Ehrman repeatedly uses Apollonius of Tyana as a parallel to Jesus. When he and I had a debate, he tried trotting out a different one, but it fell for the same thing. Douglas's criteria just ripped right through it. He didn't know what hit him. Why are you saying that? I'm saying that because it ruins your argument, Bart. The life of Pythagoras, a Greek sage, written 8 centuries after Pythagoras. Charming, funny things like that he always ate beans and stuff like that, like vegetarianism. I'm down south, y'all have barbecue. How could I be a vegetarian? That would not work for me. Many of the miracle claims of the Middle Ages are reported long after the purported events occurred. How about the second? When the first report of a miracle is at a great distance, space, from the alleged event. So we got time, now we got space. Well, I could give you a bunch of examples, but let's just say that nearly all of the miracles attributed to Apollonius of Tyana by Philostratus are supposed to have happened far, far away. In places like Babylon, where Apollonius meets with kings beneath the golden wrynecks that are dangled from the ceilings of the palace's problem. Babylon was uninhabited at the time. Did I say Babylon? I meant Nineveh. Well, there's other passages where he meets in Nineveh. Yeah, Nineveh had been an abandoned ruin for 6 centuries at that time. And it was only being rebuilt under the Sassanids at the time, not of Apollonius, but of Philostratus 100 years later. Whole swaths of miracles get eliminated by these criteria. The third criterion, when the miracle would be allowed to pass without critical examination because it supports or affirms established opinions and prejudices. Virtually all of the miracles of ecclesiastical history, like the flowers that sprang up in the footprints of St. Genevieve as she walked past. Who wants to detract from the sanctity of St. Genevieve? The healings attributed to Vespasian, the alleged restoration of a man's leg in Saragossa. Nobody wanted to disprove that. Oh, but what about the resurrection of Jesus? That was proclaimed in the teeth of the opposition in Jerusalem, ground zero where it had happened. Just a little over a month after the events themselves. And we have ample attestation of that. That passes Douglas's criteria. That's a plausible place to start. That doesn't mean it happened, but we're not just faced with a bunch of miracle claims that are all on the same level and we don't know which ones to evaluate first. No, actually, we can do a lot of sorting out by using these criteria. I want to give you a quotation from William Adams about this claim that, religions, we can say anything in the name of religion. That's not actually true. There is, he says, a wide difference betwixt establishing false miracles by the help of a false religion and establishing a false religion by the help of false miracles. Nothing is more easy than the former of these or more difficult than the latter. So let me parse that for you. Let's say that you are ambitious and unscrupulous, and you want to found a brand new religious movement. And let's suppose I want a piece of the action, so I'm going to fund your trip. I'm going to give you a plane ticket to a new location where you can start this. I'll give you a choice. You're going to start a new religion, and you want to get it off the ground. You want to have some hope. I'm going to buy you a plane ticket either to Milwaukee or to Mecca. Which one do you want? I buy you the Milwaukee ticket, and you might have success or you might not. I buy you the ticket to Mecca, you'll be dead before you hit baggage claim. Why? If people are so credulous for miracles and religious, no. Not for you starting up a new religion in the teeth of the opposition. That doesn't work. And it doesn't get a whole lot more graphic than it was in Jerusalem, where the Roman authorities and the Jewish religious authorities had just conspired to put Jesus of Nazareth to death. This was not a claim that would be allowed to pass without examination. There's a methodological moral to be drawn from all of this, and for that I'm going to appeal to one of the 19th century's top theologians, Sherlock Holmes. It is a capital mistake, he says to Watson, to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories, instead of theories to suit facts. And you say, you didn't argue for the resurrection tonight. You didn't show me that it's true. You're right, I didn't. Other speakers will do that. I'll be happy to talk with you at other times. I am an under-laborer. I'm clearing a little of the underbrush out of the way for the construction of that cathedral, and David Hume is part of that, because Hume has put up a barrier to our even looking at evidence. And once we do look at evidence, There are neglected lines of evidence that we can now consider actively. There's the evidence of incidental allusions in which authors mention in passing details of setting and circumstance that it would be hard to get right at a later date. There's the evidence of undesigned coincidences in which multiple historical accounts interlock with and explain one another. There's the evidence of artless similarity in which different scenes penned by different authors disclose the same personality, the personality of Peter, or of Mary, or of Martha, or of Jesus. And once we're free to look at the evidence, we can start looking not only at the more commonly discussed kinds of evidence, but also at these kinds of evidence as well. There's a table over in the Hardin Student Center where Nathan Ward is selling a couple of books that deal with this. There's a whole book on undesigned coincidences. There's another book that's got substantial material on things like artless similarity and incidental allusions and things like that. So go to the D. Ward table, look for books written by Lydia McGrew. She's kind of a smart person. She's also my wife. Have a look at that. I'm going to close with some words from G.K. Chesterton, from his book Orthodoxy, written while he was still Anglican. Somehow or another, an extraordinary idea has arisen that disbelievers in miracles consider them coldly and fairly, while believers in miracles accept them only in connection with some dogma. The fact is quite the other way. The believers in miracles accept them, rightly or wrongly, because they have evidence for them. The disbelievers in miracles deny them, rightly or wrongly, because they have a doctrine against them. Thank you very much.